And I call on Mary McCallum to speak to and move the motion. Up to 15 minutes, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the First Minister, representing Scotland to an international audience at New York Climate Week last week, set out very clearly how events at home and around the world this summer have been a stark reminder that climate change is not a far-off threat. The twin crises of climate change and the degradation of our natural world are affecting lives right now, and people are losing everything, up to and including their lives. We've seen drought in Africa, wildfires in Europe and Canada, truly horrifying events in Hawaii and Libya, Storm Freddy in Malawi and flooding in China, Pakistan, India, South Korea. The list goes on. And our thoughts, our heartfelt sympathies are with each and every single person who has been affected. And of course, all of that has been happening whilst biodiversity loss continues apace. And as the First Minister said, the Global South has been paying the price for the impacts of climate change for decades. We were one of the first countries to declare a climate emergency, and our Climate Justice Fund and funds for loss and damage are helping right now some of the poorest people in the Global South to adapt and to prepare themselves against those impacts which cannot be adapted to. All governments need to ask themselves at this critical juncture, are they moving with the urgency that this crisis demands? Because the time for talking is over. What we need now is action. And when times are challenging, as I absolutely admit that they are, governments must not turn their backs. They must work harder, and that's what this government will do. In contrast, the Prime Minister's decision last week to renege on the UK's key net zero commitments is an unforgivable betrayal of future and current generations. The Climate Change Committee has been clear that action by UK Government is interlinked with Scottish targets, just as action in Scotland is crucial to UK Government targets. Despite that, we were not consulted on last week's announcement, and as such we will now require time to consider the very serious impacts that it's likely to have on our plans. But it's not just government that the Prime Minister has pulled the rug from beneath. It is the huge, I will in a wee second, yes, it's the huge proportion of the public who, time and again, in opinion polls, have expressed their concern about climate change, who want governments to have plans to deal with it, and who are desperately crying out for climate leadership. And I'll give way.
Graham Simpson.
I'm very grateful. In light of the Prime Minister's announcement, is the Cabinet Secretary preparing to change the Scottish Government's plans?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, given it has been not yet a week since plans were announced that we had no forewarning of, I am very much in the position right now of assessing their impact on them. That includes trying to get detail of what exactly it is the UK Government are planning to do, and I'll certainly undertake that work before I look to see how it affects what Scotland will be doing. I'll make some progress just now, but I'll be happy to let Douglas Lumsden in later on. But I do have significant concerns about the lack of leadership and what it risks in terms of that once-in-a-generation opportunity to capitalise on Scotland's renewable energy potential. If the UK Government takes us out of the global net zero race, the economic damage, the lost opportunity will be catastrophic. And of course, let's not forget, this is on top of the damage they've already done with a decade of austerity, with the hardest of hard Brexits pursued during a global pandemic, and of course last year's disastrous mini-budget, which people in this country are still suffering because of. It is all so familiar, Presiding Officer. Preparing Scotland's Just Climate Plan in the aftermath of the Tory U-turn last week is déjà vu for where we were last year when we had to prepare the Scottish budget in the wake of Liz Truss's reckless reign. Scotland deserves so much better than having to pick our way through policy disasters of the UK Tory party. And after successive UK governments, both Labour and the Tories have squandered hundreds of billions of pounds of Scotland's oil and gas revenues, only investing a fraction in Scotland, it seems they are now intent on sabotaging our energy future. Person in government with my colleagues who we are collectively responsible for rising to Scotland's climate ambitions, I cannot pretend that these do not have an impact on us. And as I said, we're now very carefully considering the extent of it, because the UK Government may be happy to turn its back on billions of pounds of investment in jobs, skills, R&D, but I just want to put one clear message on the record today. Scotland's message to investors in a clean, green future is clear. We value you, we welcome you, and we will do everything that we can to provide the stable, long-term and evidence-based environment in which you can flourish. And I hope that this Parliament will agree that the Prime Minister must reconsider his ill-judged approach. But, Presiding Officer, this week is Scotland's Climate Week, an initiative delivered annually by the Scottish Government since 2016 to celebrate action by national and local government, public sector, businesses, communities, organisations, families and individuals. This year will focus on travel and heating, two of the areas where change by individuals could collectively have the most impact, two areas, ironically, that the UK Prime Minister has reneged on in recent days. But I'm looking forward to visiting and learning more about how this is happening across Scotland, including with Keep Scotland Beautiful and Fountain Bridge Canalside Community Trust's heritage and climate action activities this week. I know that my colleagues across government are likewise taking part, and I would encourage members from across the chambers to do so as well. And the theme of this Climate Week debate today is climate emergency, ambition and action. So in the time that I have left, Presiding Officer, I'd like to set out what Scotland has delivered so far. With humility, I accept that we have not always met our climate targets, but in the last week, it has been really galling as we do all that we can, as we strain every sinew to deliver a just transition to net zero, to have to listen to some of the Conservatives, I should say, some of them have seen sense and are not supporting Douglas Ross, but it has been so hard to listen to them because Scotland has ambition, that's often rightly narrated, but we equally have action, and I want to take us through that. So in terms of our budget, Scottish budgets have demonstrated our commitment, and in this 23-24 budget alone, we've included over £2.2 million of investment. In energy, under this government, Scotland is becoming a renewables powerhouse. We've launched the world's largest floating offshore wind leasing round through ScotWind, which will deliver an initial £750 million in revenue. But beyond that, developers have also committed to invest an average of £1.4 billion in Scotland per project, which equates to around £28 billion across the 20 projects. I will take one last intervention and then I must make some progress. He's absolutely right about recycling parts as well, and I know that renewable parts and others are helping to lead that as an industry in and of itself. Also in energy, we're investing £100 million in renewable hydrogen projects over the current Parliament and have awarded an additional £15 million to support a hydrogen hub in Aberdeen. In transport, since launching the Young Persons Free Bus Pass in January, I know the Tories are chatting amongst themselves, they might want to listen to some of this delivery, we have seen a new card holder every single minute. Along with similar schemes for older and disabled people, we're supporting more than a third of the population. With 3 million journeys every week, we're helping people to cut costs and make sustainable travel more attractive. And in rail, the ScotRail Peak Fares removal pilot will help make rail travel more affordable and accessible. Now, we know that poor air quality has a negative impact on all of our health, but we also know that the very young, the elderly and those with existing health conditions are particularly vulnerable. The Scottish Government is absolutely committed to tackling air pollution, and our low emission zones are one of the key ways in which we have done that. We've introduced them via Just Transition principles as well, with over £10 million previously having been funded through the LEZ Support Fund and a further £5 million having been recently allocated. Equally, Scotland's LEZ Taxi Retrofit Fund is the most generous per vehicle in the UK, and over 300 taxis have taken up funding for retrofitting. And I know that Labour keep flip-flopping on low emission zones, but I would just ask them to reflect, why do they think it's appropriate to condemn the people of Glasgow to poor air quality in perpetuity? We have, on active travel, we have record investment with the 23-24 budget serving almost £190 million allocated to active travel, which will invest in infrastructure projects, behaviour change initiatives and improving access to bikes. And no doubt my colleague Patrick Harvey will wish to reflect on some of that later on. And in our natural world, we're investing record levels, with more than 75% of all the tree planting across the UK happening in Scotland. And I want to just take a moment to look at heat in buildings. The Scottish Government already provides grants for clean heating systems, that at the level to which the UK Government has just increased under its own scheme. Our Home Energy Scotland scheme It also provides higher grants to those in rural areas, as well as interest-free loans. And just by way of example, we've provided £37 million to the City of Edinburgh Council to help deliver a major programme of energy efficiency improvements in Wester Hailes. Over the past 2 years, that funding has helped upgrade over 900 homes, both private and social rented, and that's at a time when the UK Government is proposing to remove energy efficiency obligations on landlords. This new path to net zero by the Prime Minister's book is keeping tenants in cold, damp, drafty homes for longer, and that is unforgivable. Now, we've always said that our ambitions in Scotland will need to consider the actions of UK Government in this area, and that, of course, includes in funding and in reserved powers. And again, that's the work that I'm currently undertaking. I want to take a moment to mention the Just Transition Fund, because we're not just talking the talk when it comes to our commitment to fairness. We are already acting through our £500 million 10-year Just Transition Fund, which the UK Government has regrettably refused to match, but which I have had the real pleasure of being involved in this portfolio, including in a visit to Aberdeen last Friday, where I saw how just £5 million of that fund was investing in different projects developing net zero skills in the North East. And there was so much enthusiasm for that work, Presiding Officer, and it really was an antidote to the rather depressing backward steps that we were seeing displayed from the street outside Downing Street. And of course, we are working with partners. I want to work with local authorities in particular on climate change, and our new partnership framework and climate intelligence service will help us do that. And I want to acknowledge the work of the Net Zero Committee in their recommendations as regards climate intelligence service. I think it's an excellent proposal, and it's one that I'll be very glad to help take forward. Now, looking forward, we know that a just transition will require a truly national effort from all sectors of our economy, including significant private sector investment in net zero and climate resilience. And those just transition plans that we have produced will help us do that. I want to let you know, Presiding Officer, that I'm receiving some very valuable feedback from our just transition plans and the discussion papers that have gone alongside that. And I will consider it my personal responsibility to make sure that fairness is at the heart of how we pursue net zero. However, unlike the UK Government, who cynically have presented their backward steps as somehow being in support of ordinary people, I find it hard to believe, Presiding Officer, that that is the Prime Minister's primary objective. But regardless, this Government will continue to get on with the challenging job of rising to what the climate emergency demands of us and doing it in a way that's fair. And we will do that via the Just Transition Commission and with others working across Scotland. And I would just encourage the UK Government to go back to the drawing board, join with us in a four nations basis in partnership. Myself and my colleagues in the Welsh Government will very shortly write to the UK Government asking them to respect the four nations of the UK, to come together with us and to revise our approach to reaching net zero, because it's a collective mission that we cannot fail in. Thank you.